Welcome to today's story, a powerful tale of loss, discovery, and the journey to healing. Michael Lawson is a millionaire who seemingly has it all, except for what matters most. For over 2 decades, he's been haunted by the grief of losing his beloved wife, Catherine. His life has become a routine of empty victories and endless loneliness, until one rainy day, a chance encounter with a young woman and her baby sets off a chain of events that will change everything he thought he knew about his past. Who is this mysterious woman? And what shocking revelation will turn Michael's world upside down, forcing him to confront secrets that have been buried for years? Stay with us as Michael embarks on an emotional journey that uncovers not only a hidden truth, but a second chance at the life he thought was lost forever. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. And as you watch, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Now let's begin. Michael Everett sat at the corner table of an exclusive Manhattan restaurant, swirling a glass of wine in his hand, barely noticing the luxury surrounding him. The muted glow of chandeliers overhead and the murmur of wealthy diners were little more than background noise in his hollow, empty world. Wealth had come easily to him. He had built an empire in finance, climbing to the top with ruthless ambition. Yet, the more he achieved, the more the victories tasted bland, like the flavorless meal in front of him. Across the street, rain streaked down the windows, heavy droplets tracing paths like the invisible tears Michael had never shed. It had been 20 years since Catherine, his wife, had died. 2 decades of routine visits to her grave, where he spoke words that echoed in the silence of the cemetery. Words that went unanswered. 2 decades of carefully avoiding any real emotion, as if feeling too much might shatter the wall he had built around his heart. He glanced at his watch, the weight of time pressing down on him. It was nearing midnight, but sleep would come in restless fragments tonight, as it always did. The clock ticked endlessly, reminding him of the life he had once had, of the love he had lost. He sighed and motioned for the check. The waiter approached with practiced elegance, but Michael barely looked up as he paid the bill, slipping his coat over his shoulders. As he stepped out into the wet, cold streets of New York, the city pulsed with life, but Michael felt as distant from it as a star from the earth. He walked toward home, past storefronts closed for the night, each one reflecting ghostly images of the life he and Catherine had once shared. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of rain pattering against the windows. It was always raining on the days he visited Catherine's grave, or at least it felt that way. The gray skies mirrored the weight in his chest, the kind of grief that settled deep into his bones. After a moment of stillness, Michael slid out of bed and into his routine. He dressed in a tailored suit, the kind that signaled success, though he no longer cared about appearances. The cemetery was quiet when he arrived. The grass, wet from the rain, glistened under the overcast sky. Michael took the familiar path to Catherine's grave, his footsteps slow but steady. He had been coming here for so long that the ritual felt like muscle memory. Stand before her headstone, say the same few words, and then leave, just as empty as when he arrived. But today there was something different. As he neared the grave, he noticed movement. Someone was kneeling by the headstone, their shoulders shaking slightly as if crying. Michael's heart skipped a beat. His first thought was irritation. This was his time with Catherine, his private grief. Yet something about the sight of this stranger felt wrong, too unsettling to ignore. He stepped closer, his shoes sinking into the soft ground, and called out hesitantly, "Excuse me?" The figure, a young woman, looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and puffy, her cheeks streaked with rain or tears, maybe both. She quickly wiped her face with the sleeve of her worn jacket and stood up, cradling a baby in her arms. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to intrude." Michael frowned, the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. "It's all right," he said slowly, his eyes flicking to the baby in her arms. "You were here yesterday, outside the restaurant. I gave you some money." "What are you doing here?" The woman glanced down at the baby, avoiding his gaze. There was a long pause, as if she was weighing her words. Then, with a deep breath, she whispered, "Catherine, she was my mother." Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. He stared at the woman, his mind struggling to comprehend what she had just said. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. "Your mother?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's impossible." "Catherine. She never had a child." The woman shook her head, her expression unreadable. "She did," she said softly. "She had me. She just never told you." Michael's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of disbelief and confusion flooding his mind. Catherine couldn't have had a child. Not without telling him. They had shared everything, hadn't they? I don't understand," Michael muttered, taking a step back, as if the physical distance might help him process the bombshell that had just been dropped on him. "Why now? Why are you here?" The woman, Sophia, as she introduced herself, took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "I only found out a few months ago. I was adopted after Catherine died. I didn't know who my real parents were until I started digging. When I learned where she was buried, I had to come." Michael's head was spinning. He looked at the child in Sophia's arms, his grandson, and felt a strange sense of responsibility, mixed with an anger he didn't know how to direct. The woman he had loved for so long had kept something so monumental from him. Why? What had she been thinking? Michael returned to his apartment, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective, but the storm inside him raged on. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. Her eyes, so much like Catherine's, haunted him. Could this really be his daughter? Had Catherine kept this secret from him all these years? He sat at his desk, pulling open a drawer filled with old keepsakes, photos, letters, remnants of the life he and Catherine had shared. In the back of the drawer, under a pile of forgotten papers, he found Catherine's journal, something he hadn't touched in years. With trembling hands, he opened it and began reading. At first, the entries were mundane, details of their daily lives. But as he flipped through the pages, he found an entry that made his heart stop. "I'm pregnant," Catherine had written, her handwriting shaky. "I'm terrified. Michael would never understand. He's so focused on the business, on our future, and I can't take that away from him. He deserves more than this." Michael's breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words sank in. She had been scared. Scared of how he would react. Scared of how her pregnancy would affect their lives. She hadn't kept Sophia a secret out of malice. She had done it because she thought she was protecting him. But in trying to protect him, she had created a void that Michael didn't know how to fill. The following days were a blur for Michael. He couldn't shake the revelation that had turned his world upside down. The words from Catherine's journal replayed in his mind, twisting his emotions in knots. It was one thing to grieve the loss of a loved one. It was another to discover that you didn't know them as well as you thought. He spent hours poring over Catherine's journal, searching for more clues about why she had made the decision to hide their daughter from him. He read about her fear, her uncertainty, and her longing to tell him the truth, but being paralyzed by the thought that it would ruin everything they had built. Michael's grief for Catherine was now laced with anger and confusion. Why hadn't she trusted him? Why hadn't she given him the chance to be a father? But as much as the questions haunted him, Michael knew he couldn't find the answers by looking backward. He had a daughter, a living, breathing reminder of the life Catherine had hidden from him. And he had a grandson. That realization both terrified and thrilled him. Michael called Sophia, his voice hesitant but determined. They met at a quiet cafe, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Sophia looked more composed this time, though there was still a wariness in her eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me," Michael began, his voice low. "I found Catherine's journal. It explained why she didn't tell me about you. She was scared." Sophia's eyes flickered with something, relief perhaps, or understanding. "She didn't have to be scared," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life wondering why she didn't want me. But I guess it wasn't just about me, was it?" Michael shook his head, a lump forming in his throat. "It wasn't. She thought she was protecting me. But in doing that, she kept you from me." The conversation was heavy with emotion, but it was the first real step Michael had taken toward bridging the gap between him and Sophia. He told her about Catherine's journal, about the love and fear that had driven her to make the decisions she had made. Sophia listened in silence, occasionally glancing down at Daniel, who sat quietly in her lap. As they spoke, Michael felt something begin to shift inside him. He realized that this was not just about uncovering the past. It was about deciding what to do with the future. As the days passed, Michael and Sophia met more frequently. Their conversations were still cautious, but the tentative bond between them was growing. They both knew there was no easy path to reconciliation, but they were willing to try. One day, while they were sitting in a park with Daniel, Sophia turned to Michael, her voice hesitant. "There's something else I found," she said softly. "Something that might explain even more about why Catherine didn't tell you." Michael's heart raced. "What is it?" Sophia pulled a small letter from her bag, the edges worn and frayed. "It's from someone you knew, David Harper." The name sent a jolt through Michael. David had been one of his closest friends years ago, before they had drifted apart. They had both been ambitious young men, chasing success in the business world. But something had changed between them. Something Michael hadn't understood at the time. Sophia handed him the letter, and as he read it, his blood ran cold. David had been involved with Catherine before she married Michael. The relationship had been brief, but it explained the tension that had always existed between Michael and David. David's letter was filled with regret, expressing his sorrow for never telling Michael the truth. He hadn't wanted to ruin their friendship, especially after Catherine had chosen Michael. But now, years later, the truth had come to light. Michael sat in stunned silence. The letter crumpled in his hands. He had lost so much already. His wife, the daughter he never knew he had. And now, he was faced with the betrayal of a friend he had once trusted. Michael couldn't let the revelation about David go unanswered. He needed closure, even if it meant dredging up old wounds. He found David's contact information, and after a long hesitation, he called him. When David answered, his voice was filled with a quiet resignation, as if he had been expecting this call for years. "Michael," David said softly, "it's been a long time." Michael's hands shook with anger. "I found your letter. Why didn't you tell me?" There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "I didn't think you'd ever find out." "It was a long time ago, Michael, before you and Catherine were even serious. She chose you, and I respected that. I thought keeping it from you was the best way to protect our friendship." Michael's jaw clenched. "You think keeping secrets is protection? You think not telling me the truth was better for anyone?" David's voice was heavy with regret. "I was wrong, Michael. I see that now. But at the time, I thought I was doing what was right." The conversation left Michael drained, but it also gave him a sense of clarity. Catherine's decisions, David's silence. It was all born out of fear. Fear of losing what they had. Fear of breaking something that couldn't be fixed. But in the end, those fears had caused more damage than the truth ever could have. After confronting David, Michael felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. It wasn't that the betrayal didn't hurt. It did, deeply. But there was also a part of him that understood why Catherine had made the choices she had. She had been scared, and in her fear, she had kept secrets that should have been shared. But now, Michael had a daughter. He had a grandson, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than grief. He felt responsibility. Michael and Sophia continued to meet regularly, though the tension between them still lingered. Neither of them knew what to make of their new relationship, but they were both trying. Daniel, who had once seemed like a distant reminder of the life Michael had missed, was now a source of joy. Holding his grandson, watching him grow, gave Michael a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As the weeks passed, Michael found himself growing more comfortable in his role as a father and grandfather. He accompanied Sophia to Daniel's doctor's appointments, learning the small details of parenthood that had once been foreign to him. They took walks in the park, shared meals, and slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been fractured by years of secrets. One day, after a particularly long day spent with Sophia and Daniel, Michael sat in his apartment, reflecting on how much had changed. The grief he had carried for so long was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer the all-consuming weight it had once been. Instead, it was something softer, more manageable. Michael realized that he had spent so many years mourning Catherine that he had forgotten how to live. But now, with Sophia and Daniel in his life, he had a reason to move forward. As Michael and Sophia grew closer, the shadow of Catherine's secrets continued to hang over them. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more he didn't know, and he was right. One afternoon, Sophia invited Michael to her apartment for the first time. It was a modest place, small but cozy, and as Michael stepped inside, he could see the life Sophia had built for herself. Toys were scattered across the floor, a soft blanket draped over the couch, and the faint smell of baby lotion lingered in the air. As they sat down to talk, Sophia hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Something I found in Catherine's things." Michael's heart raced. "What is it?" Sophia reached into a drawer and pulled out a small folded letter. "It's from someone named James. He was an old friend of Catherine's, wasn't he?" Michael's stomach tightened. "Yes, we were friends, but we drifted apart after she died." Sophia handed him the letter, and as Michael read it, his blood ran cold. James had been in love with Catherine. The letter, written shortly before her death, was filled with regret and longing, expressing feelings that had never been resolved. Michael sat in stunned silence. James had loved Catherine, and Catherine, had she loved him back? Had there been something between them that Michael had never known about? Michael felt the weight of the letter like a punch to the gut. He had already been blindsided by Catherine's secrets. Sophia, the pregnancy, the fear. But this was something entirely different. Had Catherine loved James? Had she kept another part of her life hidden from Michael? Something that went beyond their daughter? Michael confronted James, who admitted to his feelings for Catherine but insisted that nothing had ever come of them. They had been close friends, but Catherine had chosen Michael, and that had been the end of it. But the revelation still gnawed at Michael. How much of his life with Catherine had been built on half-truths and unspoken fears? In the end, Michael realized that he would never have all the answers. Catherine was gone, and with her, the possibility of ever truly understanding her decisions. But he still had Sophia. He still had Daniel. And that, he realized, was what mattered now. Michael's relationship with Sophia was fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. They were both navigating uncharted territory, learning how to be father and daughter after so many years apart. And while there were still moments of tension, there was also a growing sense of trust between them. Michael had come to terms with the fact that he would never fully understand why Catherine had made the choices she had. He had spent years idealizing her, putting her on a pedestal, but now he saw her as a flawed, complicated person who had done the best she could in difficult circumstances. Sophia, too, was coming to terms with her own feelings about Catherine. She had spent her entire life wondering why her mother hadn't wanted her, and now she understood that it wasn't about her at all. It was about Catherine's fear of losing Michael. As Michael and Sophia continued to rebuild their relationship, Michael found himself embracing his role as a grandfather. He spent more and more time with Daniel, watching him grow and learning the small joys of being a part of a child's life. One day, while they were sitting in the park together, Sophia turned to Michael and said, "You know, Daniel could use a grandfather in his life." Michael's heart swelled at her words. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." It was a small moment, but for Michael, it was monumental. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a future worth fighting for. Michael's final visit to Catherine's grave was different from all the others. This time he didn't come to mourn. He came to say goodbye. Not to Catherine, but to the past that had held him captive for so long. Standing in front of her headstone, Michael spoke quietly, his voice steady. "I forgive you," he whispered. "I forgive you for the secrets, for the fear, for everything. I know you did what you thought was best. And now I'm letting you go." As he walked away from the cemetery, the weight of grief lifted from his shoulders. He still loved Catherine, and he always would. But now, he had something else to live for. Sophia, Daniel, and the future they would build together. In the weeks that followed, Michael's life continued to shift in unexpected ways. His relationship with Sophia deepened, and his bond with Daniel grew stronger with each passing day. They were still learning how to be a family, but they were doing it together. Michael had found a sense of peace he hadn't thought possible. The loneliness that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of connection and purpose. As he sat in his apartment one evening, watching the city skyline, Michael realized that the future, while uncertain, was filled with hope. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of happiness. He had lost so much, but he had also gained something priceless: a family. And that, Michael realized, was all he needed. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. If you enjoyed Michael's journey of redemption and healing, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.